student populations, obstacles before and during COVID-19. For some of you, this might be the second time attending our series to kick off the fall semester. Last month, we focused on the emotional and mental impacts of COVID-19 and the social, racial unrest and discourse on faculty. And this month, we will be thinking and focusing more on students. And so what we will do today for our agenda is I'll start with introducing our amazing panel that we're honored to have here today. And then we will walk through, what has 2020 looked like for these populations, for these diverse student populations? How is COVID-19 specifically impacting students mentally and emotionally? What can campuses do? How have they been responding? How should they be responding? What are some interventions that are particularly effective? And we'll finish by recommending some tools and resources. And we really want this to be an interactive chat with all of you. So we would encourage you, as I pose questions to the attendees and panelists, to also share your experience in the chat. Just one note about that is that you would want to make sure that you're chatting to not just the panelists, but also all attendees. And please, as well, if you have questions, put those in the chat as well, because we will have some time at the end to address participant questions. Before I introduce the panel, my name is Suzanne Brinker. I'm one of the partners here at Tarragona Associates. We are a startup higher ed consulting firm, and I'll share a little bit more about our mission and our work at the end. But now, without further ado, I would love to introduce our panel of higher ed thought leaders. To start, we have Audra Delaney, who is a public interest and higher education communicator with a passion for student support services. Audra has worked for 2 different higher education institutions in roles that bring marketing, communications, admissions, enrollment, and student support services together. Each semester, Audra works with students from a variety of different institutions in her position with the Williams Mystic program in Mystic, Connecticut. A collaboration of Williams College and Mystic Seaport Museum, Williams Mystic is an interdisciplinary study away program based in southeastern Connecticut focused on our oceans and coasts. Audra and her girlfriend Bridget spend most of their time hiking and swimming. Audra is currently a TA consultant and joins this webinar to particularly illuminate the LGBT+ experience on campuses in the wake of COVID-19. Next, we have Alberto Maldonado, who is the Chief Executive Officer and Administrative Officer of the Roberto Hernandez Center at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. The center provides academic support and community engagement opportunities to hundreds of Latino students and their families. Mr. Maldonado also co-leads the Chancellor's Committee for Hispanic Student Initiatives, areas of engagement with the community and implementation of commitments made by the Chancellor. Alberto has served as chair and founding member of the Undocumented Student Task Force and is actively involved with the HSI network of Wisconsin. In his 22-year trajectory at UWM, Mr. Maldonado has championed numerous initiatives in the areas of pre-college, community engagement / partnership, multicultural recruitment, and scholarship development. He received both his bachelor's and master's degrees from UW-Milwaukee. He joins today's panel to illuminate the perspective of Latinx students and their families, and also the perspectives of dreamers in the United States. Next, we have Twama Nambili, who is an MBA student and Dean Scholar at Brandeis University here in Massachusetts, concentrating in strategy and innovation and data analytics. She holds a Master's of Science in Corporate Governance and Business Ethics from the University of London, Birkbeck, and a bachelor's degree in International Business, Trade and Commerce from St. Norbert College in Wisconsin. She joins today's panel to illuminate the perspectives of international students in the US before and after the coronavirus pandemic. And finally, we have Kristen Taylor, who is a student success consultant, author, and executive coach and trainer. Her book and course, Remind and Remind the Basic, are currently in use by multiple institutions to address mounting levels of depression and anxiety among students. Kristen designs and delivers individual and group training, mentoring, and digital coaching interventions for nonprofits, colleges, and universities. She joins today's panel to discuss strategies for students, faculty, and administrators to manage uncertainty and anxiety during an unprecedented fall semester on US college campuses. We want to start today's discussion, which we're so excited for, with this amazing panel and diverse perspectives, taking a little bit of a situational snapshot. And I would like to start out with Alberto. When you're looking at the Latino students and the populations that you're working with at UW-Milwaukee, what are you seeing? What are the challenges that 2020 has brought for this population that you're working with? There are probably quite a few. And you would want to unmute yourself before you start.
Well,
there we go.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be here with all of you and such a distinguished panel. And I think you ask a question that has not only been exacerbated, probably in the most recent months in terms of what our students are experiencing, but it's more important to recognize what this population, or at least the population that we serve on our campus, already bring with them, right? And their reality. Their reality is that they are not your traditional student. They commute to campus, and high percentages, they're mostly the first one in their family to go to college. And thirdly, and more importantly, is that they already are very much concerned with affording their ability to attend college. So, when an individual, bring those elements and those already very, very unique challenges and realities, and then you bring up a pandemia into the mix, you're going to encounter some challenges. So our students rely heavily on those connections, those human connections on our campus. They rely heavily on our center, the center that I humbly direct with my team. And when you take that out of the equation, there's a number of things, right? How am I gonna connect to campus? What are those mechanisms that I'm gonna utilize to connect? Who are the people that I'm gonna continue to connect with in this environment? And more importantly, if mom and dad lost their job due to all the changes that have happened, how am I gonna, in this environment, again, afford college and whatnot? And then you take it even deeper level when you talk about undocumented or DACA students, and there's just another layer of issues that come with that. And so our approach and campus approach has been to immediately outreach, to immediately identify what are those key areas that students need help with. What are the things that are going to facilitate their success, but more importantly, what are the things that are going to facilitate their well-being and mental health, right? We can give them a computer, we can give them a hotspot, internet connectivity, but if at the core of that student, they're dealing with just a number of different things that we are ignoring or we're not aware of, the student is not going to be successful at the end of the day. So very important to acknowledge their uniqueness, their identity, what they bring, as an individual, as a community, as a student. And then we can begin to unpeel and connect, the missing links or the things that they need in order to be able to stay afloat. And right, is it food insecurity? Is it housing? Is it, what's the long list of things that oftentimes, perhaps, in this cookie cutter model that sometimes we fall into, right, in a typically predominantly white institution, we're trying to, help students, but sometimes we could miss out on a really good opportunity to get to the uniqueness and the needs of those students. So we've done a lot of those things. We've gone back to having to pick up the phone, right? We rely so much on internet and social media and Instagram and Snap and all those things that we forgot that there's something called the phone that we can pick up and call and say, you know what, how are you doing? You know, and how can we help you, right? Because they're already getting hundreds of emails. They're getting already hundreds of online chats and webinars and stuff like that. But, you know, so it's identifying those needs and really arriving at a place where we can meet those needs as a collaborative, right? Not as a one individual. You know, everybody on campus, from the dean of students office to administrators to faculty, staff, peer mentors, and other folks.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's so important to keep in mind there are those really material needs and requirements for resources and physical things. And then there's the mental and emotional piece and the uncertainty that students are also dealing with. And you were saying before you can really start providing practical interventions, you also have to take care of the human being and what they're struggling with. Audra, when you hear Alberto talk about his experience, particularly with the Latinx community and their families, what resonates with you as you're thinking about LGBT plus populations on campuses, kind of what's similar and what's different from what you're hearing from Alberto?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of what Alberto just said that is directly affecting the LGBTQ population as well. And having an LGBTQ identity automatically puts individuals into buckets to have, you know, higher rates of depression and anxiety and suicidal thoughts. It puts them in buckets to have more unstable home lives, to have economic situations that are less than ideal, and to really struggle with being able to belong anywhere. And I think that you know, a lot of what Alberto was talking about is connected to those things, and a lot of what's happening to LGBTQ students is the same way, but we also have to recognize that there's intersections. So having an LGBTQ plus identity and having other identities that could cause one to have more discriminatory actions brought against them, or violence, or you know, having not as many financial resources can also exacerbate the things that they are already experiencing, and that was happening prior to COVID-19. And so to summarize the challenges that are facing the LGBTQ community now is that college, which for many LGBTQ students and people can be viewed as a safe haven and a place where they can build community and they can come out of the closet and they can be themselves. Well, now they are back at home, or in some places they don't have a home, right? So their home is non-existent. So you know, they've now lost that community they had. They lost sources of income that they may have had from their college campuses, and they lost the community that matters so much to them. And they are now potentially in living situations where, you know, their families don't know that they have an LGBTQ plus identity, or if they do know that, they make them hide it. Or they tell them, you know, like, we will disown you if other people in our family find out about this, or people in our community find out about this. They threaten to send them to church or conversion camps at times. A lot of this has been reported that that's what's happening to college students right now. And so the just elimination of the places that they thought were the places that they could go to have and find resources are gone. And that's not to say that the schools and that fellow students and faculty members aren't still trying to reach out to this community. But what it means is that they just don't have the ability to advocate for themselves in a way that they could when they were on campus and they could go talk to these people one-on-one. And so those are the biggest things, I think, that the ways that the challenges that existed have now become even harder to navigate for this group of students.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all that, and this notion of campuses as the safe haven, you know, falling away as a result of COVID-19, I think is applicable across the board for a lot of students right now, and obviously most of all for those who are marginalized in their homes as well. Fama, you are an international student now in the US for the second time. You did your bachelor's here, and then you left for a while, got a master's in London, returned to Namibia. You just got back last week. Welcome back. It's not easy to be an international student, period, right? There are so many challenges. Maybe you could touch on things, you know, like visa hurdles and not being able to work off campus and things like that happened anyway. before COVID, and how did COVID jeopardize your return to the US, and how is it impacting you now?
Okay, so thank you for having me, and that's a great question actually, because it's very relevant to my situation. And having lived here, first coming here before, there was obviously that element of a cultural shock. So like as an international student, you're navigating so many things. You're navigating having to adapt to a new culture, adapt to a different way of life, even sometimes a different educational system. So there's all these like challenges that are coming at you, that are completely different from what you're usually used to, and you are sort of thrown in the deep end, and you have to sort of like swim and figure it out. So having like a good environment where you can sort of find your way is always a very useful thing. I know like when it relates to the visa situation, that is usually a very tricky and very hard process. It's not just enough to get an offer from a university. You still have to, to prove yourself to the embassy. And it's very difficult, and it's been made even more difficult with COVID-19. And I'll go into that a little bit, a little bit later. In terms of the work, yes, there are limitations with regards to working on campus as an international student, at least until you have lived here or you have done at least two semesters in the US. Only then would you be able to qualify for what is called a CPT. And that, again, is also a little bit of a limitation. When you go back now to the visas, COVID has just, it was a challenge. It was truly a challenge, because obviously with the regulation by SAIF that they had actually, not SAIF, ICE, that they had announced, that had put a lot of plans out of sync. A lot of like even lending organizations that would normally lend to international students sort of like withheld some of the funding. I ran into that issue myself. You have a lot of students that had plans, that have invested money, or like they have invested emotionally into being an international student, being here, if they were, and they're now being told you have to leave, or they were being told you cannot enter after you have gone through the process of, let's say, leaving your job because you were anticipating, going. So there's all those hurdles that you are facing. And then again, one thing that is a bit unclear now for international students is working. Whether or not, if they're studying, a hybrid system, whether they will be able to qualify for CPT to work off campus, or whether if they're, because those students that are completely 100% online, they cannot, they can still study abroad, but it's unclear whether they will be able to qualify for CPT, whether that semester that they have abroad is going to count towards, that one extra semester that they need to get that kind of qualification. So I think overall, COVID has put quite a lot of challenges ahead of the students, ahead of me. I know personally, and I think Suzanne, a little bit of this story, but it's I don't know, like it was just a bit harder. Let's just put it that way. And even in terms of expenses, for the flight alone, for example, to come here was nearly double, actually more than double how much it normally costs to come here, because I had to take a repatriation flight to get to campus in order to start my program. So there are things like that that are really out there that are affecting international students, and hopefully things obviously adjust and get better, but there are many students out there that are missing opportunities because of this, like international students.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
So we've highlighted a lot of uncertainties and stressors, right? And so Kristen, when you think about the mental and emotional impacts of all these stressors, of all this uncertainty, from a neuroscience perspective, right, can you explain what's happening with students and how it's keeping them from maybe meeting their full potential as academics, but also just, just distracts them from everything that they would usually be able to focus on in life?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I'm so honored to be here, and thank you, Alberto, Audra, Tuama. I mean, this perspective, the insight, the compassion, and the experience you bring is just so humbling, and I will do my best. My hope is that in whatever I share, that whomever you are, you take little kernels that will be significant and meaningful. So in terms of the neuroscience, Daniel Goleman, who really coined the term, he's kind of the father of emotional intelligence, he calls it an amygdala hijack. And I feel like, and I'll get into the amygdala and a little bit more and I'll unpack that, but I feel like given all that you all just shared and all that you all that I can't see are experiencing, we are all sort of in this collective amygdala hijack. The amygdala is in the center of our brain. It's one of the most primitive parts of our brain. It's the emotion center. It's also the place of like fight, flight, or freeze. And there is just, I mean, just listen to their stories and their words. There is so much emotional suffering going on, understandably, and also disproportionately. All the stories attest to the disproportionality of that. And you all, I say you all to the collective that is here that I cannot see, are, I imagine, experiencing an amygdala hijack as well. And the amygdala being more primitive, it's not, first of all, it's really important and we need to tend to it. And I choose that word very deliberately. I say tend. I'm not saying control, and I'm not even saying manage. And I'll get to that in a moment. It's an important part of our brain. It's really important to pay attention to our emotions. And we ideally want to move from that place of hijack where it's like the amygdala is really lit up. Because when we are in the amygdala, we are not able to be as cognitively flexible and intellectually and emotionally resourceful and expansive in our thinking. It just doesn't work that way. Okay. And there are two things that happen. And by the way, that expansiveness, that flexibility, that resourcefulness, intellectually and emotionally, intellectually mostly, that's in the prefrontal cortex. We want to be able to deliberately, when we are feeling that hijack, and I think we can all connect with that feeling. It's like the hammering heart. It's, maybe it's the pounding temples, the sweaty palms, or maybe it's just the overwhelm of despair, loneliness, isolation, anxiety, depression. It keeps us really locked in that part of our brain. So there are two things that most of us as human beings do in the face of heightened emotion. Or, I think of emotions like they can be really, really challenging feelings and emotions. At best, they're unpleasant. And at worst, they can feel debilitating. So we do two things. One is that we want to avoid them. Of course, you're like, let me pick up my phone. Let me, look at something else. Let me do anything not to feel what I am feeling right now. On a smaller level, you can even think of it as procrastination as a way of attempting to emotionally regulate. Like right now, I feel okay. If I do that one thing, like buy a plane ticket that is almost 3 times higher than it should be, I'm going to feel all sorts of emotions that I don't want to feel. So I'll do that later. Okay. So that in the moment can make us feel better, but in the long term, it amplifies our emotional suffering. So that's one, like fleeing our feelings. So understandable. The second thing we do is this is like the stories we create, the meaning we make from our experience. And man, there's a lot of meaning happening right now because there are a lot of stories happening right now, and stories matter. But what we can do is we can over-identify with our feelings. Like if we're feeling nervous or panicked or overwhelmed, we can internalize it and say, what is wrong with me? I'm not up to the challenge. I can't do this. I'm not strong enough. We create stories in relationship to our emotions rather than recognizing our emotions are not who we are. It's like energy moving through us. It is what we experience. And so in response to your question, what can we do? There's so many little things that we can do, but one of the things that if you all are going to take anything away, when you feel emotion that feels like it's building, or you feel like you're descending into a story that is super disempowered and it's just cycling over and over again, like an emotional spiral, instead of saying, why am I feeling this way? And don't get me wrong, why matters, context matters, all the stories that we've heard, context matters. There are huge inequities happening right now in relation to this, all that we know is going on in the world, okay? But in that moment of saying, I need to get into my prefrontal cortex so I can be as resilient in the face of all of this, instead of saying, why am I feeling this way, which we are prone to do, I encourage people to say, where in my body do I feel this? The work that I do is really the intersection of neuroscience and mindfulness, and it's bearing witness sometimes away from the thoughts. I mean, you can say, I'm just noticing these thoughts are happening, but then the mindfulness of tuning into the body. Is it in your heart? Is it in your gut? Getting out of the story and then saying, what do I need to do to soothe that emotion? Right? I could go on and on. I don't want to, speaking of hiding, I don't want to take too much of the time, but move away from why am I feeling it? Where am I feeling it in the body? How can I soothe that? Does that mean that I need to journal write? Does that mean that I need to remind myself that right now I am safe, that I am loved? Whatever it is to help soothe, like you would a child or an animal or someone that you cared and loved about, it's really bringing that loving presence to that energy to help dissipate it so that you can get from the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex.
I never tire of listening to you, Kristen, about this, and I always feel calmer afterwards.
Well, good.
So much good insight, and I think so. So you've really highlighted, what's happening within our bodies and within our minds as individuals, and then what can we as individuals do to help ourselves, right? Like, how can we step out of it? Like when Fama bought that plane ticket and didn't necessarily have all the funds, but still needed to do it in order to get here in time for a semester to start, or when an LGBTQ plus student has to figure out where to live and maybe has to live with a relative that is not affirming of their identity, but they have to do it because they need somewhere to sleep, right? When those moments, or we can come up with more examples, I'm sure, but how can, and so you've highlighted this, it's so empowering that that person in that moment has some, resources that are internal, that don't cost any money, that don't need anybody else's help, that they can pursue. And then in addition to that, I would love to speak with all of you about what campuses can do as well. And I'll just quickly start with you, Kristen, to just ask about faculty administrators, because you have actually developed a resource that can help them implement more mental health focused interventions on campus. And then I want to hear from everybody else about what interventions you've seen work and maybe which ones you've seen that haven't been super effective. So Kristen, I'll start with you on that.
Yeah, thank you. So I will just give a nod to something Alberto shared yesterday, which is really to be as intentional as possible. And yes, I have created course content really in response to this. It's called The Basics, and it's a lot of what I just described. It gives steps for students and faculty, because my goodness, of course, faculty and administrators are also in the throes of this collective amygdala hijack. We all need to learn to emotionally comfort and regulate ourselves. So it's the idea, back to Alberto, of it being very intentional. So really importantly, and I think this goes without saying, but I want to say it very clearly, like what I'm sharing is not in replacement of mental health services. What I'm talking about is more high level coping skills. Audrey, you had mentioned that these lives of people who are living under extreme stress, there aren't even words for that kind of stress, like to the level that it gets to suicidality. That is not what I'm talking about. That's something that really needs a professional to help support them. The things that I would prioritize and the things that I encourage is empathy, active listening and empathy. And here's the thing, I've been training people for over an a decade on how to work with students and provide active listening and empathy. And we all hear empathy and we're like, yeah, I know what empathy is. Sure, that's super important. And in the abstract, empathy is completely relatable. Practicing empathy, it's not that easy. And so I love that people are getting on the phone and they're having these communications, they're having that human element. But if you can find any resource, yes, it is found in my material, but you could also like look online for Brene Brown or Daniel Goleman, anything you can do personally to support your ability to show up with empathy, to truly feel with someone, to listen to their story. Because that is creating the safety and the trust so that when you are assessing what are their needs, they're more likely to tell you so that you can support them in moving towards the resource that matters most. And also empathy towards yourself. If we could just elevate how important it is not only to embrace empathy, but just the brass tacks. What does an empathetic statement sound like? And how can I practice it more? And how can I truly listen in a way that engenders that connection and honors someone's journey in the midst of this?
Thank you so much. Alberto, I know you in the past when we chatted before have shared some programming that has happened at UW-Milwaukee that you found very effective and that you found made a difference in the students' lives that you serve. Can you share about that? And maybe you have additional ones even since we last spoke about it.
Yeah, and before I share some of that, I want to piggyback on what Kristen was mentioning. You know, a lot of our students are yearning, the human connectivity. Remember, their spring semester was cut short of finishing what for many perhaps was their last semester, graduating. They were at a capstone, particular moment in their academic career that was very significant. And when you talk about the population of LatinX students that I have the pleasure to serve, education is highly valued, and reaching these milestones for them are extremely important, and for their community, right? Because each one of them carries, their community on their shoulders, right? There's a lot of pride that comes with that. But in the absence of that human connection and those safe spaces that were mentioned earlier, where did you find those students? Secondly, the Latinx community has been probably one of the hardest hit, if not the most hardest hit, by COVID, and particularly in the Milwaukee community. That's the reality, right? Frontline folks, essential workers, all the things that we know. And then you have the summer, which is, in other scenarios of enrollment, we coin it as a summer melt, right? When you disconnect from your high school counselor and 3 months go by and you don't know who to go to. So it's almost like a summer melt in some sense. And so as a campus, for us, it was very important to not necessarily activate, but, take to another level how we were putting programming together, how were we reinventing ourselves, right? That's, I think, the right word, because I think we all, in some capacity, had to reinvent ourselves, learn something new. But that intentionality that Kristen alluded to, it's at the core of that programming. So from emergency funds being created and reimagined again, our food pantry, right? When we talk about food insecurity, how can they access that resource? Our counseling office really working very intentionally with the different communities on campus to really take a pulse once again on what was already pretty evident, but now how can they approach this? So working in small group counseling, one-on-one, allowing different scenarios for students to tap into. Our computer loan program. I mean, and the list goes on and on. But the most important thing, and what I think, you know, we have learned through this process is that there's not one single program that's going to solve, you know, the things that our students are experiencing, that we have to be nimble to creating, you know, a plethora of opportunities for our students to feel what there was already a problem, right? There's a lot of our students that, you know, struggle with a sense of belonging, right? Because they're trying to find that community. They're commuting from home. They're code switching, right? At home, they're speaking Spanish. On campus, they're speaking English. At home, they might not have a space to study, and on campus, they did. And so, you know, it's that intentionality and really providing the programming and the spaces. And what I mentioned earlier, that human connection. I think what I take home every time I speak to a student is, you know, I can just see through the phone or through a Teams meeting or whatever platform I'm using, a smile that I'm putting on their face, because they're like, oh, you took the time to call me and to ask me how I'm doing. So, I mean, I can speak on and on about, you know, different programs that we've done. Most of it, as you know, has been virtual, creating different platforms for both prospective, current students, graduate students, working with faculty. And I think that's, I think, the beauty of this process. In the midst of chaos, we have even strengthened our community on campus to be able to deliver what in my mind, it's very intentional work.
Thank you so much. And Audra, as someone who has recently graduated, what have been programs and ways that the campuses that you have studied on have supported you, that you thought were, you know, helpful? And then also in your work at Williams, where you're working with administrators in different centers around the country, what have you seen and thought, this makes sense, you know, we should do more of this?
Yeah, I think, you know, a big initiative that, you know, people can pick up on really fast is including pronouns on Zoom, as all of us have done here, particularly in the virtual space, but that we're in now. But even moreover, people can put their pronouns in their emails next to their name when in their email signature. And what that does is it's a way to signal to students that you're affirming of everyone's identities as much as you can. Because even if, you know, or it could be a signal to them like, okay, so this person sees that, they also could see it and think, I wonder if this person is cisgendered, or if maybe they're transgender like me. Like, they can see themselves in other people and think, okay, like, I could reach out to this person. I could begin to feel safe with this person. This person cares about the identities of everyone and is working likely to figure out how to support all of those people. And so I think that that is a big thing that I've seen happen. And I saw it evolve over my time in college, in undergrad, just because it wasn't, to my knowledge, at least talked about as much in 2014 and 2015 as it was near the end. And now in my role with Williams Mystic, it's something that I feel very strongly about that people should do, because you know, affirming the identity of somebody is, just like Kristen said, how you get them to come to you when they need somebody most, you know, or how you're going to be able to come to build a relationship with them where you're going to be able to support them in a lot of different ways. And that can help. That probably has attributed to some students being supported by faculty or staff members during this time, because if they build a relationship with them prior to COVID, and then they go back to a home situation that's not ideal for them, they have that person already that they can pick up the phone and they can talk to, you know what I mean? And then for the students, like Alberto was saying, that, you know, you're meeting new students, you know, having those things and doing that stuff and getting on the phone with them can be another, you know, way to do that. And aside from pronouns and email signatures and on Zoom, you know, when professors start classes or staff members meet people virtually, they can introduce themselves by while including their pronouns too, which is just another way, you know, to put that out there for people. I think that that is, you know, the biggest the biggest thing that I've seen. And then also back to working at Williams Mystic is I've seen so many centers really build in safe space programming and use different curricula to, you know, build different resource workshops for people to learn more about gender identity, about what it's like to be LGBTQ+, but also, you know, have a different racial identity than white. So how those intersect with each other and what that can mean for a student's, you know, experience while in college. And the list goes on and on of things they've been able to do. But I think that multicultural centers, or specifically sometimes schools have multicultural centers that have LGBTQ+ resource centers in them, that those places are places that are really showing up for students, and that they've been doing so amidst the pandemic, you know, and we're doing so before, and they're going to continue to do it as we navigate this during portion and coming out of it. So I think, you know, that those places are really doing work that matters so much. And additionally, I've also seen some programs post on social media ways for students to change their names in the educational software system that some institutions have, which is a really important thing, because if a student is transgender or is non-binary and they choose to go by a different name, so they have a dead name that they don't want to show up on educational software or in their emails, that someone helping them figure out how to change that, like that supports their mental and emotional health so much, because then I'll have professors who call them by the correct name, who refer to them by the correct pronouns, and they're like, okay, like I'm being seen as myself, you know, not as an identity that I don't want to be seen as. So that's another big intervention that I've seen schools, even the institution that I went to, the first time I saw it was the institution that I attended in Ohio. They did it, and I was like, wow, that's awesome that this is in a public space. And I imagine that they likely shared it internally too. But yeah, so those are just some options I think for people to think about as they try to see how they can support this student group a little bit more.
Thank you. That is
Susan,
really helpful. Go ahead.
Can I just quickly make a quick plug? This is something that was shared with me recently, and I wanted to share with the audience and all of you. Is the work coming out of the Hope Center out of Temple University. It's called Hope for College, hopeforcollege.com. They did a campaign that it's called Beyond the Food Pantry. And it's particularly talking about what we're, talking about today, which is, what are students' experiences during the COVID, and what are some of the resources that are out there for them to connect with, and for practitioners as ourselves to take note and see for how we can best implement those in our individual colleges. So highly encourage you to check it out. I've shared that with my colleagues on campus. Our Dean of Students is already connected with Hope for College to conduct a survey on our campus to take, again, another pulse on our students and create new resources or revamp existing resources that are in alignment with some of the initiatives that the Hope for College program is doing. So just wanted to put that out there as a resource.
Thank you. That's great. Awesome. Wama, when you think about the moments where you felt most supported by the campuses, two campuses, right? One in the past, that there was no COVID-19, but you still needed support. That's different from a domestic student. And now at Brandeis, where you're a new international student in this pandemic, think about the moments where you felt most supported and where you felt least supported. What can you tell us about that?
And then just to clarify, you're talking about when I felt most supported at the previous school, or both?
I think I was curious about both, and maybe contrasting between when things were a little simpler because campus operations were going as they should, and then now it's so different. So I was just curious, sort of the hurdles you had to jump through, and how have you felt supported? Has it been through certain offices, through certain programming, through certain people? What stands out to you?
I would say that as for my past, I went to 3 colleges at this stage. Now I'm counting. At the first college, I felt most supported by, mainly, oddly enough, at the beginning, it was mainly one individual heading up the international admissions office. So that felt like a safe place because he was very understanding of the situation I was going through, and I was going through a lot of emotional, financial, a whole lot of traumas that you feel sometimes. It's not just an international student, but just as a general student. So I felt like I could go there. But you have to also understand a little bit with me. I come from a culture, and obviously this is something I had to change. At that time, I came from a culture where, um, you know, psychologist is not a thing. Like, you cannot go to psychologist. That's not seen as something that you should do. It's like frowned upon. Like, what? Why are you out there? Why do you need to go to somebody to tell them your problems? Go maybe to the eldest person in your family and then explain. But what happens when the eldest person now is the person who is bringing, the problems to you? Like, so it was a bit of a challenge. And then I also I found solace in fellow students that were going through similar situation. I also relied heavily on the community built around the college, to help guide me through some of the difficulties I was going through. I never actually used the mental health, you know, counseling opportunities that were provided at the time. In terms of the previous university, the college, I felt like that one was a huge disconnect. I think it's a great example of what colleges should not do, because I 100% didn't feel much supported at all. You're basically just thrown into the deep end, and I get the fact that they were more focusing on what do you call it, adult education. So most of the people were already working. So you don't really have as many programs as I have now. I've been at Brandeis for a week, and they're constantly sending out emails. They really care about your mental health. They want to make sure that you're coping well with COVID-19. If you're LGBTQ, they want to, they're pushing you towards, and they're informing you towards the right resources for you. I also found out about obviously the counseling that you could book. And now they're obviously doing virtual bookings, but they keep insisting, try. We know you're going through a rough time. You should go to these things. And another thing I recently have been talking about to somebody has been their spiritual center. They have a completely spiritual center of all religions that you could go there if you're having troubles, or if you want to sit down with somebody. He can be somebody religious or not religious. They also offer guided meditations for students that are extremely stressed. And then if you feel that you want to go talk to somebody, but you don't want anybody to be there, you just want privacy, then they also offer that. I feel that compared to all the other schools that I've attended so far, it seems that Brandeis offers a lot more. And then they also have, and this is new, and I think you addressed that, Audra, about actually addressing your pronouns. That was something new to me, because most of the emails that I receive, people identify their pronouns. And I think obviously that's a good thing. In terms of, what else did you say, Susanna? Sorry.
A lot of things.
Yes. But other than that, I think overall just creating a supportive, welcoming, safe haven community for students to feel that they can come is a great thing. But to go beyond that, to actually it's not enough to just have the counseling center, but I think it's important to keep reiterating and reinforcing that it exists, and why students must go there. Because again, some students may come from a background which may discriminate, or discriminate against, maybe that's not a good word to use, discriminate against you using those resources. So instead they end up suffering in silence. They end up struggling alone. They take on the load on their own when there are resources that are there. So yeah, that would be my recommendation.
Thank you so much. Wow.
You're welcome.
And I'm glad to hear that you feel more supported now than you have in the past, and that all sounds extremely helpful. And it's interesting that, you know, I know that you're still facing some logistical challenges and as you get settled back in the US, but you really are emphasizing that mental and emotional piece and how much that means to you. So that's really interesting and makes a lot of sense. I think for the last part of our panel discussion, we'll go to the next slide and just a rapid fire sort of, you know, conversation on what makes you optimistic as you look towards the future. Hopefully COVID-19 is not here forever, but even over the next year and then beyond, you know, what makes you optimistic when you think about the future of higher ed and diversity in this country, and what worries you, not to end on what worries you, but curious about both. And I think we'll start with Twama and go backwards from where we've gone before.
In terms of the future, there are several things. Obviously, I'm a very big optimist, you know that. I like to think that things can always get better. Things can always change. Change can be good, can be bad. In terms of you know, higher education, I think there might be, due to COVID, there might be a change in terms of maybe classes moving more online. But I think because we have that desire, again, connecting to what Alberto said of human connection, you will still have in-person classes. And I think that's very important, even like in an educational setting. And then diversity here, when I watch the news, I try to avoid watching too much news. I get very worried about it. But I am very optimistic that things can get better. I know that's a very political answer to give, but yeah.
Great. We're happy you're back in this country now and
Yes.
contributing to all kinds of great things here. Audra, what about you?
I think that I'm, as far as what worries me from the perspective of advocating and supporting LGBTQ plus students, is just a potential lack of funding that could be provided to the centers and the places on campus that they, you know, need the most. So whether that's the LGBTQ plus resource centers, or if it's multicultural centers altogether, or if it's the counseling centers, and then student organizations. Like I'm really worried about what the impacts COVID's going to have on the institutions, and then the cuts that institutions may have to make. And I hope that those who make those decisions, you know, really prioritize the ability and what Kristen and Alberto have both said in different ways, the intentionality that needs to be given towards supporting these student groups, LGBTQ plus students, but also all the student groups we've talked about today, and all the student populations that exist on college campuses to varying degrees. So that's my biggest worry from that lens. But I'm optimistic about the ways, again, that these universities and the different parts of them are showing up for students in different ways. I know that, you know, different institutions did lavender graduation, which if you don't know what that is, it was started, I believe, about 25 years ago, as a way to honor the contributions that LGBTQ plus students as well as allies make to their university communities. So they did lavender graduation virtually. Some institutions have done Black graduation virtually. You know, that they've pivoted, they've taken those things and they've put them virtual, and they've still been like, okay, we're going to celebrate this. And even though we have to celebrate it virtually, that we're going to do it. And that makes me optimistic that those things are going to still be celebrated once people are back on campus in their communities, and hopefully even more so for, you know, all of the different student populations and student organizations. And I've seen, you know, university student governments work with Black Student Union, Latino Student Union, Asian Student Union to develop different ways to help the student populations battle what's going on with COVID-19. And that makes me really optimistic for the future too. The student voice, I think, is going to carry a lot of weight and is going to really help these campuses support their students. And I hope that by these students, you know, taking initiative and protecting each other and supporting each other, that the schools are going to see like, okay, they're doing it for each other. You know, we need to keep doing it for each other in some cases, or we need to do it better in other cases for some schools. So students always make me optimistic. I think those of us who work in higher ed and get a little taste of what the students are doing and how they're going to lead the future, I think that can help make us more optimistic.
Yes, that's what we're all here for. Kristen, what about you?
So I think to piggyback on both what Tuama and Audra have already said, it's the students. It's the students. So when I think about life in general, just sort of existentially and spiritually, we are, again, collectively in this major, major trial, as I see it. And it's excruciating. And it's also dismantling some of the systems in place that just are antiquated and don't work. And so what keeps me optimistic is that students are really spearheading social justice and equity and that human connection. And that my hope is that a byproduct is that community and mental health and connection becomes prioritized in a way that it never has been, or has been, to Audra, your point, invested in enough financially. Like, I really hope it's like this major paradigm shift, that in as much as we are going through something so painful, that it has purpose and it leads and elevates and evolves us to do right by one another. And when I look at these social justice pioneers, these young students, it's the rally cry, and that's what gives me hope.
Yeah. Alberto, anything that you want to say that hasn't been said? You're muted.
Kristen, you stole a little bit of my thunder there, but rightfully so. I think you hit it right on the nail. I think if I've learned anything in the last 5 months is that out of some horrific, incidents in our history and in our communities, a lot of good has come out of that, and I know it still carries a heavy burden. A lot of our students still today, even it hits home with the incident with the tragic incident with Jacob Blake here in Wisconsin. I mean, it's like one thing after the other, but a lot of great things are coming out. A lot of our young people are speaking up. A lot of our young people are voicing, their opinion. And adults have no choice but to listen. Administrators have no choice but to pay attention. And adults don't have any other choice but to act on the things that ought to happen and ought to exist on our campuses. And so we're seeing a shift, not just at the nonprofit and the higher ed, but corporate. I think this is going to impact, and it's impacting already, a lot of things in a positive way. So I think that's part of my optimism. And the other part of my optimism is something I've always firmly believed and has been sort of confirmed with the work that I do on Hispanic serving initiatives, is this idea that the future of higher ed is a very diverse one. The future of higher ed is multi-ethnic. It's multicultural. Those are the communities that are going to continue to grow. When we talk about demographics in our nation, and demographics, in terms of enrollment, in terms of how higher ed is going to be constructed from now on, and rightfully so. What's happening today, the actions that are coming out of this. On our campus, we just dedicated $100,000 to anti-racist education. We're having mini grants. We're having all these things that could have existed before, but now folks are acting on that, and we're engaging a wider and more diverse community than ever before. So that gives me hope, and Yes, the budgetary stuff, the declines of enrollment, I think we all in some capacity know what that looks like. And you know, we have colleagues that have lost their jobs because, you know, our campuses look a little different. But I guess what worries me is, you know, in the political environment that we find ourselves today, it saddens me at times, it angers me at times, and I hope, I have big hope in the human race, and I know, you know, that there's still more good than bad happening. So I guess I'm gonna leave it at that.
I love it. Thank you. And I know we could keep talking. We are out of time, and we will do more webinars in the future because these conversations matter. They're really important. We so appreciate all of your time and expertise and insight. I would love if anybody has resources for further reading, please drop them in the chat. We will grab them and send them out to the group afterwards. We are Tarragona Associates. If you are an administrator, faculty member, anyone working on the staff at the university, reach out to us. If you'd like a free consult about your priorities for the year, we're always very happy to learn more about institutions and see where we can help. And with that, just thank you all so much for attending today. We will be sending the recording out to everyone who attended or registered. And just a final thank you to our panel. You guys were fantastic, and I bet I speak for everyone when I say that we would love to hear more from you in the future. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.